So when I was watching the debate, kept pure in all ages, right? Christian
Yeah,
McShaffrey.
yeah,
Actually, I love Christian McShaffrey.
I do
We've had
too.
some really good conversations and such. But he watched the debate, and then towards the end, he proclaimed you the victor. So kept pure in all ages, recognized that Dan Haifley's performance, we'll say, wasn't what was expected. Given the disappointment that it was for many in the King James, I don't know if it was a disappointment for all of King
Yeah,
James
Matthew
version onlyists,
Verschoor
but
was another
many,
one, Bible protector.
yeah, yeah, many were disappointed in Haifley's performance. Did Dan Haifley's sorry, did Dr. Haifley's performance in the debate meet your expectations?
Let me let me put it a couple ways. One is my son,
Sure.
my 14-year-old, just asked me, "Dad, who was the official winner of the debate?" And I was like, you know, there's no officer, there's no official who's in charge. Nobody gets to say. I mean,
Right.
ultimately God does, and he hasn't revealed that to us. In heaven, I guess he can tell us who won. By then, it won't matter. We'll be all together, King James
Right.
onlyists and non-King James onlyists. I do think that the best measure of who won is people on one side or the other. If they proclaim that their opponent won, so yeah, that would be a good measure. But I don't even care about that measure. What I care about is
Right.
persuading people. I will consider myself to have won when I find that this is part of an overall successful mission of persuading my brothers and sisters in Christ to jettison the false doctrines of King James onlyism. So that's what matters to me. I don't really care about who won or lost. I feel we both won in some really important ways, and that's not like egalitarian doublespeak. I think it's a really important victory for King James onlyism to speak charitably and graciously the way Dan did. I acknowledge he scored a point off me after that question. Some of my
Yeah, very
some
good.
of my followers were starting to say that it was kind of a gotcha question, and I actually defended Dan. I said, no, I think it was fair, totally fine. Yeah, I that was a victory for him. He got a point there. Was he well prepared enough? I will say, my dear brother Dan, if you listen to this, I was a little surprised that he didn't come with typed out notes, at least for the opening speech. That was the moment when I felt like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
I felt like he
and
got
I had
stronger
to I
though.
have to admit, yeah, I have to admit, like even in my own review I did a couple weeks ago now, I had a hard time following along with Dan's opening statement, because it was supposed to be in regards to the intelligibility
Right.
of the King James version, but I just generally found that he was all over the place, really tough, and I suppose it'd be really tough to win a debate when your opening statement is, I mean, fairly weak. I think many would agree with that. And now I don't know Dr. Dan Haifley, so it's probably a little bit easier for me to point out the flaws in his opening statements because I don't know him personally. But just from an outsider, from his camp, that's more what I found with, at least with
Yeah.
his opening statement.
And he
And then
it took me a
go
little
ahead.
while to, even while I was there, you're processing so much while you're on the stage live in front of a bunch of people. But as I've had time to think about it, yes, I had a little more structure because I prepared it all, and my opening statement was definitely prepared. My final statement was actually kind of pieced together in the moment, but I had the pieces already prepared. I didn't want to prepare
Right.
it word for word because I wanted to be able to respond to things in the debate. But the basic illustrations of Abraham Lincoln and then of William Tyndale, I was hoping to use if I had the opportunity, and I did get that opportunity. Dan didn't seem to do that. But what he said, if you can kind of boil it down, I mean, it's not irrational. I believe it's wrong. I still disagree with him, but he's saying you can use pastors to teach you what the King James means. He said that as long as you understand the gospel, it's sufficiently intelligible. He said that the Holy Spirit will lead you to understanding these things. He even said that people like Mark Ward can help you. Those are answers. They're not irrational. I do think he did engage the substance of the debate. That maybe wasn't his best day for putting it all together rationally. I do think we're coming from different traditions. I do come from a more academic world. He comes from a more pastoral world. Nothing wrong with that. I think that was a little bit of the mismatch there. But actually, he did have points of substance to make. Maybe the framing could have used a little more polish.
Right. All right. Good. Good. All right. Now I have a question for you about something you said in the debate, and I think this was part of your opening statement, and it was that institutions. I think you specifically said institutions
Right.
should stop using the King James
Yes.
version. Now, when I think about this, now this is where the I'm disagreeing with you is coming out.
Go ahead.
And so I'm asking you, don't you think it would be the opposite way around? Doesn't that kind of undercut your argument a little bit? Because if I'm reading a King James version by myself at home, I've got no one there to explain this to me and teach it to me. But if I'm using it in an institutional setting, like a church, for example, the pastor's going to be preaching. He's going to be defining these words for me and sharing with me what the passage is.
Yeah.
So shouldn't that be flipped on its head?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what I'd say is, I'm about to say it, so I guess this is what I would say, that I'm opposed to exclusive use of the King James in general by anyone. I think at the very least, you ought to have the liberty in your conscience to read other translations. I really don't want to lay the burden on someone's conscience to require them to use a modern translation, even though I just said I don't think it should be used exclusively. I do back off of saying that would be some kind of sin. I mean, there must be millions, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dear older saints who've grown up with the King James, who do understand it sufficiently well, and that would be really hard for them to even add anything else. And I remember even as an 18-year-old how jarring and difficult it was for me to pick up a modern translation. It just didn't sound like God's word to me. That's no longer the case. I'm way past that. But I recognize that's a barrier for people to cross. I think the reason I focus on institutions is that they do have such a shaping influence on the people who are in them. And that if you on an individual level, your conscience is bound to using only the King James Version, there's a level of Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 9 that, possibly applies here, where I actually don't want you to violate your conscience. Whatever is not of faith is sin. I'd like you to educate your conscience. I think 1 Corinthians 14 ought to educate your conscience. But I want to be really careful and gentle with individuals who have their consciences bound. But where I feel like I can draw a more definite line, a definite line is institutions where the pastor is drawing a line of conscience for others, and in particular children. And in particular, like my heart still, after all these years, it's been years since I've been involved in this kind of ministry, but I put years and hours and hours and hours into Bible club for kids in a really nasty neighborhood, where hardly anybody had dads, a teen club for kids weekly where same thing, hardly anybody had dads, an adult ministry there that was like a church bus ministry where they were functionally illiterate. And I just feel you're putting some kind of millstone around the neck of these poor defenseless people who are going to memorize verses that I know they're not understanding. And how do I know? Because I asked every single one of them. I taught memory verses, and I just could never bring myself to get them to mouth the syllables without my also asking them, did you understand this? And they didn't understand the NASB very well, let alone the King James Version.
Now it's interesting how you talk about people who don't really fully, who aren't literate or fully understand language. Like I often think about, and this is where we would agree, is English as a second language, right?
Yeah.
They have enough challenges, for example, coming into Canada,
Right.
being part of the culture, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The last thing that I would do for someone like that who is just barely learning the English is to give them a King James Version.
Right.
And this is where I don't have any issues with recommending something like the CSB,
Right.
Because it's, it flows a little bit more with English, helps them read, helps them understand English better.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. And for me, this comes down to the textual question now, and you typically stay away from that. In fact, it was interesting watching the debate because Dan continually wanted to bring that back to the textual question, and you just set that aside. That's right. But the differences between the modern critical editions and the Textus Receptus, for me, is not worth the problems that an ESL individual is going to have with reading a KJV.
Right.
Now, would I want them to read a TR or a Byzantine text, more specifically a Byzantine text?
Yeah.
We don't have many translations.
Right.
Of course I would, and I would teach and I would preach from that. And when they see those verses missing, I'm going to say, well, no, it's here. It should be there.
Yeah.
The difference between the textual matter for the sake of an ESL, I think, it's not worth the hassle, right? You got to pick and choose your battles. In coming back to that question, why is it that you don't touch on the textual question?
Yeah.
Why not debate that? because I think that's what I initially thought the debate was going to be. And then
Right.
when I saw it, I hate to admit it, but I was a little disappointed that
That's
it wasn't
fine.
going to be the textual matter.
That's fine.
So why not debate the textual matter?
Well, Dwayne, I invite your interaction on this. I really do, because one of the reasons I enjoyed your wrap up video of the debate. It's nice to be proclaimed the winner, but you disagreed with me on matters of substance, and so that made your opinion just that much more valuable. Here, I feel like I've been saying this over and over and over again. Maybe I haven't been clear. I don't know. Maybe I am just wrong, but I think you'd agree with a lot of this, at least. Robert Truelove himself told me, he's a confessional bibliology guy, and we've actually had some recent correspondence.
He was a majority text. He was a majority text guy, from what I understand, and he shifted from an MT position to a TR position.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. That's very possible. Yeah, I've always been able to have cordial discussion with him, and we just had some recently. Actually, he's going to be on my channel soon. I got to get it all in before December 31st, right? So
that's right.
I invited him to come on. I have a video also coming out about an interaction that we had about 2 years ago, which was positive as well. But he told me one time, those guys in the IFB, they don't care about the TR one whit. And on the one hand, I don't want to say anybody out there is a liar. They say they care about the TR, fine. I don't think that anybody out there is self-consciously lying. But when over and over again I see evidence that what they really care about is the King James and not the TR, that has to play into my understanding. And I see many evidences that most people who say they care about the TR, when it comes right down to it, when push comes to shove, whatever the phrase is in Canadian English, I don't know, when the moose meets the antlers or something.
Sure.
When that happens and it's the King James that's the real standard, then I think, why should I argue about text? More substantially, though, I don't care if people use the TR. I mean, do I care at all? Yeah, I mean, I would prefer everybody use the critical text, because yes, I do believe it to be superior both to the Byzantine and to the majority. They're really close things, and then to any given TR edition. But that, to me, that's totally a matter of Christian liberty. The differences are not significant. What really matters, and where the Bible actually addresses this issue, is in translation. Edification requires intelligibility. God, to my mind, gave us zero direction on how to do textual criticism, aside from the light of nature. We're using principles of general revelation. So I just don't want to disagree about that. I don't want to have a fight about that when I don't mind if people use the TR. The most fundamental reason, though, is 99.99. Somebody tested me when I said 99.999. So I did the thinking, and I think it's 99.99% of King James or TR defenders that I've met insist on the exclusive use of the King James.
Right.
Or at the very best, they'll sort of leave the door open for the New King James or Modern English Version, but then they'll come up with what, to my mind, are very dismissive and weak reasons to say, well, we can't trust those things. No alternative to the King James, even TR-based alternatives, are ever okay. And I just think, how could that really be the issue for most of them? Are there some people out there like Robert Truelove for whom the TR really is the issue? Yes, fine. I believe that. How can they prove it to the rest of us? I say, show an openness to use a contemporary English, fully intelligible translation of the TR. Then we'll talk about the TR. That's my basic point for all these years.
Would you be open to debating on the textual matter?
I feel like that's a great question. And by the way, you're supposed to poke holes in anything that I just said too, and I really would like some pushback if you feel like. So let's get there after I answer your question. I would be open to it. In my mind, like in the distant future, when TR defenders use the New King James and Modern English Version in large enough numbers that it doesn't feel like a fake issue to me, then I'd be willing to talk about textual criticism and even debate it.
Yeah, so that it's an interesting discussion amongst King James Version onlyists, right? And I think I've had both feet in both worlds, so to speak. Being a Byzantine guy, I'm literally right in the middle. I don't want to say straddling the fence, because that's not very particularly comfortable. Yeah. But there's right because there's people I enjoyed speaking with. I made friends on both sides of the discussion.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, in my own videos, I have one particular critical text guy who holds me to account in everything that I say in my videos in a good, loving way. He's a great person. I enjoy interacting with him, and then of course others. But yeah, when it comes to the King James Version onlyists, I've found that there are various levels of acceptance of the Textus Receptus.
Yeah.
There is David Cloud, for example. He goes to the position of the King James itself being the next kind of iteration of the Textus Receptus. So it makes that jump from the Greek into... and I think Nick talks a little bit about that. He's mentioned that before. I think that's more his position. And then you have those who are King James Version only, but are good with the Textus Receptus. And then, as you suggested, when you bring in other translations, well, we can't use those. They're not trustworthy. 1 Corinthians 1:18 and 1 John 3:16. These are corrupt. It's all or nothing.
Right.
No, I don't particularly like that all or nothing thinking.
Right.
But where it gets more interesting is when you talk to the confessional bibliology guys. Yeah. And I know you've had a bit of a smat with smat. That's a bad word. I won't use that.
I don't know
you've had some interactions with them before. And so have I. I was able to talk to Jeff Riddle a number of years back and actually keep in contact with people like Christian McShaffrey and stuff. And they would not call them. In fact, they take offense at being called King James Version only. Now, what's interesting about their position is they allow a little bit of wiggle room in their word for word preservation. So for the confessional bibliology guys, they would say, well, it's the family of Textus Receptus.
Right, exactly.
And I think Dr. Riddle has gone in to find like consensus readings amongst the, what did he call them?
Mature classic Protestant editions of the TR.
That's it. Yeah. Yes, that's it. You got it.
Which is a way of eliminating Erasmus, Novum Instrumentum, which didn't initially include the first John 5:7.
Competency and polyglot because it doesn't have 1 John 5:7. Actually, CP's got some interesting readings in it. Actually, might even be worth a video. But that aside, I think they obviously prefer the King James Version, but I think even Dr. Riddle himself had suggested that the Geneva Bible is pretty good too. So there's this linkage together, and this is where I think the disconnect is. There's this linkage together that not only is the text base critical text, but so are the translational methodologies. And so they link up the translational methodologies with the text critical discussion, and then they pull those over. So it not only has to be a Textus Receptus translation, but it also has to be not using a critical text style of Greek grammar to translate it. So you get into these... so you get into these issues... Yeah, where we've talked about 1 Corinthians 1:18, for example. And there's a couple others. I think there's like 6 or 7. No, those are differences. Anyway, there's a number of them out there. I'm reading David Daniel's book, The Bridge Bible, and I'm shaking my head at some of the stuff he's saying. But it'll be interesting. Anyway, so I'm deviating a little bit from the original discussion point, which was that the textual question. Right. Would you be willing to debate that? So I guess the answer is no. Would you?
Yeah. I mean, it was a potential yes, but it had such criteria attached to it that I don't think it'll ever happen. I would be overjoyed to be wrong, Dwayne. What I really care about is people reading the Bible in their own English. I really do care about the plowboy. I'm not some secret critical text plant who's, wanting people to get in the Bridge Bible so they'll eventually use the corrupt text. I would be overjoyed for people to stop on the bridge at the New King James. I don't mind if they don't come over and use the ESV. That really is fine with me. I'm a Protestant and I'm a Baptist, and I really firmly believe and have since my cradle, practically, even before I was a Christian, I believe that people need to have the Bible in their own language. This is a deeply held Protestant value, and I think it's being lost word by word if you insist on the exclusive use of the King James. That to me is the debate, and I flatly deny, I utterly refuse to believe that the textual debate is the real debate. Now, is there a debate about it to be had? Sure. But I don't think it's what's driving hardly anybody in the confessional bibliology or or certainly the IFB movement. Let me add, I've said this publicly, they're not the same. Confessional bibliology does do a better job, generally speaking, of separating text and translation. But you just gave an excellent example of how it still ends up getting confused.
Now, I am looking at the clock here. You've got about 5 minutes. So I am going to open it up and give you the last word. So was there anything that you wanted to say to my audience while you are here?
Well, you've been deeply involved in this debate, Dwayne, and you've been a constructive and entertaining voice. I like your videos. I think more people should watch your videos. I really like having a minority report. I know, ironically, you have the majority text view. I know you don't. It's the Byzantine, not the majority. But
we just saw that movie, by the way.
Oh, really? Yeah, it was years ago. I thought it was pretty good. I think it's good and healthy for there to be a minority report. What I like about you is that you are able to have that disagreement cordially, even if there are sharp elements of disagreement. You're able to state it. You're not calling my Bible corrupt. It doesn't seem to me that you are. No. You don't lose your relationships and friendships over the abusive language that you use to defend your position. Like I told Robert Truelove, and he agreed with this, if we're going to have this debate in Christianity, and I wish I didn't. I wish everybody agreed with me because I'm right? We all feel that way.
Yeah, that's right.
If we're going to have this particular debate, I've been deep in it for all these years. People don't think I address the text critical stuff. I do. I just don't always do it publicly. I am deeply involved in it. I know the issues, and I have done quite a few videos, way more than I expected on it. Anyway, I would rather our disagreement be like paedobaptism versus credo baptism than like Orthodox versus heretic. And they want to call my Bible corrupt. Like, can we just tone it down? If you prefer the TR, fine. My preference is that you use a contemporary, fully intelligible translation of it. I've made arguments for that. Please engage those arguments directly. But even if you don't want to do that, let's at least get the rhetoric down and let somebody like Dwayne be your model. You've been able to have these cross-border conversations with critical text guys like me, no problem whatsoever. And when you start to disagree with me and I hear you in my earpiece, I can tell you're about to say something because you disagree with what I just said, I get excited. Like, here's a smart guy who's really listening to me. He's going to say something of interest to me. That could be the way it is with a confessional bibliology and IFB King James onlyism, and it is with some figures. But the great majority of experience I've had with both groups online, less so in person, but most of it is online, discussion just becomes impossible very quickly. And I'd really like to see that change.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your kind words at the end there. And thank you guys for watching. And brothers and sisters, until next time, we'll see you around.